Judge Barrett screams, "You're going to jail," at Jasmine, until Jasmine reveals the dark secret behind Barrett's 7 children that destroys her career forever. The federal courthouse in Indianapolis stood like a fortress of justice on that gray October morning. Inside its limestone walls, what was supposed to be a routine constitutional hearing was about to become the most explosive judicial confrontation in American history. Nobody in that packed courtroom could have predicted that by day's end, one of the most powerful judges in America would be fleeing in disgrace, and the other would emerge as the most fearless truth-teller of her generation. Judge Amy Coney Barrett sat behind her imposing mahogany bench like a queen surveying her domain. Her black robes hung perfectly pressed, her blonde hair was styled with television-ready precision, and her pale blue eyes carried the cold authority of someone who had never been truly challenged. She had good reason to feel confident. As one of the youngest Supreme Court justices in history, Barrett had built her reputation on unwavering conservative principles and an almost fanatical dedication to what she called traditional family values. But today, she wasn't sitting on the Supreme Court. Today, she was presiding over a special federal hearing on constitutional interpretation, a hearing that had drawn national attention because of one specific participant, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. Barrett's fingers drummed once against her gavel as she watched Jasmine enter the courtroom. Everything about Barrett's body language screamed dominance, control, superiority. She had requested this hearing specifically to challenge what she viewed as Jasmine's radical interpretation of constitutional law. In Barrett's mind, this wasn't just a legal proceeding, it was a chance to publicly humiliate someone she saw as a threat to everything she believed in. Jasmine walked through the courtroom doors with her characteristic grace, but those who knew her well could see the difference. Her usual calm had an edge to it today, a sharpness that suggested she had come prepared for war. She carried a single black leather briefcase, worn at the corners but meticulously organized inside. To most observers, it looked like standard legal materials. They had no idea they were looking at a nuclear weapon. As Jasmine took her seat at the respondents' table, she felt the weight of Barrett's stare trying to intimidate her. Barrett had specifically arranged the seating so that Jasmine would have to look up at her throughout the proceedings, a psychological power play that had worked on countless attorneys over the years. But Jasmine wasn't intimidated. If anything, she seemed expectant. Like someone waiting for a show to begin. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity. Legal scholars, journalists, political observers, and curious citizens had all come to witness what promised to be a battle between two of the most formidable women in American politics. CNN had arranged for live coverage. C-SPAN cameras were positioned to catch every angle. Social media was already buzzing with anticipation. But none of them knew what Jasmine had discovered. None of them knew about the documents in her briefcase. None of them knew that Amy Coney Barrett's carefully constructed public image was about to be torn apart by the truth. When Barrett called the hearing to order, her voice carried the kind of imperious authority that had intimidated lawyers for years. She didn't just speak, she pronounced, as if every word was being carved into stone tablets for future generations to study. This hearing has been convened to address serious concerns about constitutional interpretation and the proper role of government officials in judicial matters, Barrett began, her gaze fixed directly on Jasmine. We are here because certain individuals have demonstrated a concerning disregard for established legal precedent and proper judicial deference. The phrase, certain individuals, was delivered with the precision of a surgical knife. Everyone in the courtroom knew exactly who she meant. Today we will examine whether someone can claim to understand constitutional law while simultaneously undermining the very institutions that safeguard our democracy, Barrett continued, her voice growing more pointed with each word. We will determine whether respect for judicial authority still means anything in this country. It was a masterclass in judicial intimidation. Barrett was using her position, her authority, and her platform to publicly question Jasmine's fitness to participate in constitutional discourse. It was personal, it was professional, and it was designed to destroy Jasmine's credibility before she even had a chance to speak. The courtroom held its breath. This wasn't normal judicial procedure, this was a public execution disguised as a hearing. Jasmine sat perfectly still during Barrett's opening assault, her hands folded calmly in her lap. She didn't fidget, didn't shift in her seat, didn't show any sign of distress or anger. If anything, she looked amused. Like someone watching a performance they had seen before and knew the ending to. In the press gallery, veteran court reporter Sarah Martinez leaned forward. She had covered Barrett's cases for 3 years and had never seen the judge this openly hostile toward a participant. Something personal was driving this confrontation. Barrett wasn't finished. She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to make the courtroom strain to hear every word. Ms. Crockett, you have built a career on grandstanding, on seeking attention through inflammatory rhetoric and disrespect for our institutions. Today, in my courtroom, you will learn what real accountability looks like. The threat was unmistakable. Barrett wasn't just questioning Jasmine's legal arguments, she was threatening consequences for challenging her authority. But Jasmine just smiled. A small, knowing smile that somehow made Barrett's threat seem desperate rather than powerful. Barrett had made a critical error, and she didn't even realize it. By making the hearing personal, by attacking Jasmine's character and fitness, she had opened a door that she would soon regret opening. She had shifted the focus from legal interpretation to personal integrity. And if there was one thing Jasmine Crockett was prepared to discuss, it was Amy Coney Barrett's personal integrity. Your Honor, Jasmine said, rising from her seat with fluid grace, I appreciate your concern about respect for institutions and personal accountability. Those are indeed crucial values for anyone in a position of public trust. Her voice was warm, respectful, even deferential. But there was something underneath it, a current of electricity that made the hair on Barrett's arms stand up. Before we discuss my alleged shortcomings, Jasmine continued, perhaps we could establish the standards we're using to judge fitness for public service. After all, if we're going to discuss accountability, we should make sure we're all held to the same standards. Barrett's eyes narrowed. This wasn't the defensive response she had expected. Jasmine was supposed to be rattled, off balance, forced to justify her actions. Instead, she was turning the conversation toward standards. I'm not sure what you're implying, Ms. Crockett, Barrett said, her voice carrying a warning. Oh, I'm not implying anything, Jasmine replied smoothly. I'm simply suggesting that if we're going to discuss the importance of honesty, integrity, and respect for the law, we should all be transparent about our own adherence to those principles. She reached down and placed her hand on her briefcase, not opening it yet, just touching it. The gesture was subtle, but Barrett noticed it. So did half the courtroom. For instance, Jasmine continued, you've built your judicial philosophy around the concept of originalism, the idea that the Constitution should be interpreted based on its original meaning and the values of the Founding Fathers. You've also been a vocal advocate for traditional family values and what you call natural law. Is that correct? Barrett nodded cautiously. This was safe ground for her. Her judicial philosophy was well established and widely respected in conservative circles. And you've often spoken about the importance of personal example in judicial service, Jasmine pressed on. You've said that judges must not only interpret the law correctly but must live lives that reflect the values they uphold on the bench. Would you agree with that principle? Absolutely, Barrett said, her confidence returning. This was exactly the kind of moral authority she wanted to project. Excellent, Jasmine smiled. Then I think we have a solid foundation for discussing accountability. Her hand moved to the clasp of her briefcase. Because I have some questions about how those principles apply to your own conduct, both on and off the bench. Barrett felt a chill run down her spine. Something in Jasmine's tone had shifted, not louder, not more aggressive, but sharper. More focused. Like a laser beam finding its target. Jasmine opened her briefcase with deliberate care. The sound of the latches clicking seemed amplified in the suddenly silent courtroom. She reached inside and withdrew a manila folder, thick with documents and marked with red tabs indicating different sections. "Your Honor," Jasmine began, her voice taking on the measured cadence of a prosecutor presenting evidence, "you've spoken frequently about the importance of family values and the sanctity of traditional marriage and child-rearing. In fact, your confirmation hearings featured extensive discussion of your role as a mother of 7 children." Barrett's face remained composed, but her knuckles were beginning to whiten as she gripped her gavel. "During those hearings," Jasmine continued, "you described your family as a blessing from God, and spoke movingly about the joys and challenges of raising 7 children while maintaining a demanding judicial career. You presented yourself as a living example of how women can balance professional achievement with traditional motherhood." She paused to let the words sink in. "The American people were inspired by your story. A successful judge and devoted mother, raising 7 children with love and dedication. 2 biological children and 5 adopted children, all part of what you called God's plan for our family." Barrett remained silent, but something in her eyes had changed. A wariness that hadn't been there before. Jasmine opened the manila folder and removed the first document. "This is a birth certificate," she announced, holding it up so the courtroom cameras could capture it clearly. "For Emma Catherine Barrett, born August 15, 2010. Listed parents, Amy Coney Barrett and Jesse Barrett." She set the document down carefully on her table. "Emma was your 5th child, born when you were already serving as a federal judge. During interviews, you spoke about the miracle of her conception and birth, how blessed you felt to have another biological child after several miscarriages." Barrett's breathing had become slightly more shallow, but she maintained her composure. "Here's what's interesting," Jasmine continued, reaching for another document. "This is Emma's actual birth certificate, the original one from the hospital, before it was amended." She held up a second birth certificate. Even from across the courtroom, it was clear that something was different about this one. On this version, the birth mother is listed as Maria Santos, age 19, of South Bend, Indiana. The father is listed as unknown. There's a notation indicating that the child was immediately surrendered for adoption through a private arrangement. An audible gasp went through the courtroom. Barrett's face had gone pale. "According to this document," Jasmine continued relentlessly, "Amy Coney Barrett is not Emma's biological mother. She's her adoptive mother. But here's where it gets interesting." Jasmine reached into her folder again and withdrew a thick stack of papers bound with a rubber band. "These are financial records from the Barrett Family Trust account, covering the period from July 2010 to September 2010, the 2 months surrounding Emma's birth and adoption." She began reading from the top document. "July 18, 2010, wire transfer to M. Santos, $75,000. Memo line, living expenses. July 25, 2010, payment to Midwest Adoption Services, $15,000. Memo line, legal fees. August 1, 2010, wire transfer to M. Santos, $50,000. Memo line, medical care. August 10, 2010, cash withdrawal, $25,000. No memo. August 20, 2010, wire transfer to M. Santos, $100,000. Memo line, final payment." Barrett tried to interrupt, "Those records are private financial." "Are they?" Jasmine asked mildly. "Because they were obtained through a perfectly legal subpoena as part of a federal investigation into adoption fraud. An investigation that you successfully buried using your judicial connections." She held up another document. "This is a report from the FBI's Public Corruption Unit, dated September 2015. It details evidence of illegal baby buying operations involving several prominent families, including yours. The investigation was terminated when you were appointed to the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals." The courtroom was in stunned silence. The implications of what Jasmine was revealing were staggering. "According to this investigation," Jasmine continued, "Maria Santos was paid $250,000 to carry a child specifically for the Barrett family. She was housed in a private facility, given fake identification documents, and coached on what to say if anyone asked questions about the pregnancy. Barrett's hands were visibly shaking now. "But here's the truly illegal part," Jasmine said, her voice dropping to ensure everyone had to lean in to hear. Maria Santos was not a willing participant in this arrangement. She was an undocumented immigrant who was threatened with deportation if she didn't cooperate. She was essentially forced to serve as a surrogate mother for your family. Emma wasn't the only one, Jasmine continued, pulling out more documents. "Let's talk about David Barrett, adopted in 2008. And Benjamin Barrett, adopted in 2012. And little Sarah Barrett, adopted in 2014. She spread the documents across her table like a prosecutor laying out evidence of a criminal conspiracy. In each case, the birth mothers were young, undocumented, and vulnerable. In each case, they were paid substantial sums of money, far beyond legal adoption fees. In each case, the adoptions were arranged through private services that have since been shut down for illegal practices." Barrett tried to stand up, but her legs wouldn't support her. She sank back into her chair. "Your Honor," Jasmine said, addressing Barrett directly for the first time with complete formality, "you didn't adopt 5 children out of Christian charity. You bought them. You participated in what amounts to human trafficking, using your wealth and position to exploit vulnerable women and separate them from their children." The courtroom erupted. Reporters were typing frantically. Camera operators were adjusting for closer shots. This wasn't just a scandal, it was a revelation that threatened to destroy one of the most prominent conservative figures in America. But Jasmine wasn't finished. "Let's talk about your 2 biological children," Jasmine continued, pulling out a new set of documents. "Julia Barrett, born 2003, and Michael Barrett, born 2006. During your confirmation hearings, you spoke movingly about the experience of pregnancy and childbirth, about the miracle of carrying life within your body." She held up 2 medical files. "These are your complete medical records from 2002 to 2007, obtained through a court order in connection with the adoption fraud investigation. They make for very interesting reading." Barrett was now gripping the edge of her bench so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. "According to these records," Jasmine read, "you underwent a complete hysterectomy in November 2001 due to complications from endometriosis. The procedure was performed at Northwestern Memorial Hospital by Dr. Patricia Williams." A collective gasp echoed through the courtroom. "This means that you were physically incapable of becoming pregnant after 2001. Julia and Michael Barrett are not your biological children. They were also purchased through illegal adoption arrangements, but you falsified their birth certificates to make it appear that you had given birth to them." Barrett tried to speak, but no words came out. Her carefully constructed public image was crumbling in real time. "You have spent 20 years lying to the American people about your family," Jasmine continued. "You have built your entire judicial philosophy around traditional family values while secretly participating in illegal adoption schemes that exploit vulnerable women." Jasmine wasn't done dismantling Barrett's carefully constructed image. "Let's talk about your religious convictions," she said, pulling out another set of documents. "You frequently cited your Catholic faith as the foundation of your judicial philosophy. You've spoken about the importance of living according to God's law and natural order." She held up what appeared to be a church document. "This is a letter from Father Michael O'Brien, former pastor of St. Joseph Catholic Church in South Bend, where you claim to be an active parishioner. The letter is dated March 2019, and it was sent to the Vatican's Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith." Barrett's breathing had become rapid and shallow. "In this letter, Father O'Brien reports concerns about serious moral irregularities in your family situation. He specifically mentions his discovery of what he calls deceptive practices regarding the origin of children and financial arrangements that appear to violate Catholic teaching on the dignity of human life." She looked up from the document to meet Barrett's horrified gaze. "According to Father O'Brien, when he confronted you about these concerns in 2018, you threatened to use your judicial position to launch an investigation into the church's finances unless he remained silent. You used your power as a federal judge to intimidate a priest into covering up your crimes. Barrett finally found her voice, but it came out as a strangled whisper. Those documents, they're fabricated. This is a coordinated attack. Are they fabricated? Jasmine asked calmly. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a digital voice recorder. Because I have audio recordings of your conversations with several of the birth mothers. Would you like to hear them? Barrett's face went completely white. Actually, Jasmine continued, let's start with something simpler. This is a recording of your phone conversation with Maria Santos from August 2010, just 5 days before Emma's birth. She pressed play. Barrett's voice emerged from the speakers, crystal clear and unmistakably hers. Maria, you need to understand that if you try to back out now, there will be consequences. I have connections with immigration and customs enforcement. I can make sure you're deported within 24 hours, and you'll never see your other children again. The young woman's voice responded, clearly distressed, please, Judge Barrett, I changed my mind. I want to keep my baby. Barrett's recorded voice was cold, threatening, it's too late for that. You took our money. You signed our contract. If you don't follow through, I'll make sure you lose everything. The audio recording had shocked the courtroom into absolute silence. But Barrett, desperate and cornered, made the fatal mistake of trying to reassert her authority through force. She banged her gavel so hard it echoed like a gunshot through the courtroom. That's enough, she screamed, her carefully maintained judicial composure completely shattered. I will not sit here and listen to these fabricated lies designed to destroy my reputation. Her voice was shrill, desperate, completely unlike the controlled authority she had projected for years. Ms. Crockett, you are in contempt of this court. Bailiff. She pointed at Jasmine with a shaking finger. Arrest this woman immediately. She is going to jail for perjury, for slander, for. She couldn't finish the sentence. Her rage had overwhelmed her ability to speak coherently. 2 court bailiffs started moving toward Jasmine, but she remained perfectly calm, standing slowly and gracefully. Your Honor, Jasmine said, her voice cutting through Barrett's hysteria like a blade, I don't think you want to go down this path. You're going to jail. Barrett shrieked. Right now. Today. I'll make sure you rot in prison for what you've done to my family. But Jasmine just smiled. That same knowing smile that had unnerved Barrett from the beginning. Judge Barrett, she said quietly, before you have me arrested, there's one more thing you should see. Jasmine reached into her briefcase one last time and withdrew a sealed envelope marked with federal evidence tags. The envelope was thick, official-looking, and bore the seal of the Department of Justice. This morning at 6:30 a.m., Jasmine announced, her voice carrying clearly to every corner of the silent courtroom, federal agents executed search warrants at your home, your office, and the offices of Midwest Adoption Services. They seized computers, financial records, and communication devices as part of an ongoing criminal investigation. Barrett's legs gave out completely. She collapsed into her chair as if someone had cut her puppet strings. The investigation is being led by the FBI's Human Trafficking Task Force in cooperation with the Department of Justice's Public Integrity Section. The preliminary charges being considered include human trafficking, conspiracy, wire fraud, money laundering, and obstruction of justice. She held up the sealed envelope. This contains copies of text messages recovered from your personal phone, including conversations with adoption brokers, birth mothers, and various co-conspirators dating back to 2005. Barrett tried to speak, but only a strangled whisper emerged, this can't be happening. Some of these messages, Jasmine continued relentlessly, detail your plans to acquire specific children from vulnerable mothers. Others discuss payments to corrupt officials to falsify birth certificates. And several contain explicit threats against women who tried to change their minds about surrendering their children. Jasmine opened the envelope and withdrew a stack of printed text messages. "Let me read just a few examples," she said, her prosecutorial voice echoing through the stunned courtroom. Text from you to adoption broker Linda Maxwell, dated May 15, 2012, found another potential. Young Hispanic girl, illegal status, perfect for our purposes. How much for a boy? Barrett was now hyperventilating, her face a mask of terror and disbelief. Text from Linda Maxwell to you, boys cost more, $300,000 total package. Can arrange documentation to make it look natural. Your response, done. Wire transfer details attached. Make sure she understands the consequences of backing out. Jasmine looked up from the messages to meet Barrett's horrified gaze. Text from you to your husband Jesse, dated August 20, 2014, Sarah's birth mother is getting emotional. May need to remind her about ICE. Can't have her interfering with our family. Jesse's response, do whatever it takes. We've come too far to let some teenager ruin everything. The investigation has also revealed that you weren't working alone, Jasmine continued, pulling out another document. Your adoption trafficking operation was part of a larger network involving several prominent conservative figures who wanted to project images of large, traditional families. She began reading names from a list. Senator Mike Matthews of Texas purchased 3 children between 2008 and 2015. Congressman Robert Walsh of Florida, involved in the trafficking of at least 5 children. Judge Patricia Harrison of the Fifth Circuit personally facilitated illegal adoptions for 12 different families. Barrett was now openly sobbing, her judicial authority completely destroyed. The investigation has identified over 200 children who were trafficked through this network over a 15-year period. Children separated from their mothers through threats, coercion, and fraud. Mothers who were told their children died in childbirth when they were actually sold to wealthy families. But it gets worse, Jasmine said, her voice now carrying the weight of a prosecutor delivering a closing argument in a capital murder case. The investigation has uncovered evidence that your trafficking network extended internationally. Children were purchased from impoverished families in Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras, then brought into the United States through fraudulent adoption proceedings. She held up a document marked with the seal of Interpol. This is a report from the International Criminal Police Organization detailing what they describe as one of the largest child trafficking operations in modern history. Your name appears 47 times in this report as a key facilitator and organizer. Barrett was no longer functioning as a judge. She was a broken woman watching her entire life collapse in real time. According to Interpol, Jasmine continued, children as young as infants were purchased from desperate families for as little as $5,000, then sold to American families for upwards of $400,000. The profits were used to expand the operation and corrupt officials in multiple countries. When FBI agents began investigating this network in 2015, Jasmine revealed, you used your position as a federal judge to obstruct the investigation. You provided advance warning to co-conspirators, helped destroy evidence, and threatened witnesses. She pulled out a new set of documents. These are recorded phone conversations between you and FBI agent Sarah Chen, who was leading the trafficking investigation. In these conversations, you can be heard offering Agent Chen bribes, threatening her career, and attempting to derail the investigation. Another audio recording began to play. Barrett's voice was immediately recognizable. Agent Chen, I think you're misunderstanding the situation here. These are respected families, pillars of the community. If you continue this investigation, it's going to hurt a lot of innocent people. Agent Chen's voice responded professionally, Judge Barrett, are you attempting to interfere with an ongoing federal investigation? I'm trying to help you understand the consequences of your actions. Your career could be very short if you make the wrong enemies. You didn't just obstruct the investigation, Jasmine continued. You actively used your judicial power to protect the trafficking network. She held up a series of court documents. Between 2015 and 2020, you presided over 17 cases involving immigration, family law, and human trafficking. In every single case where the outcome could impact your trafficking network, you ruled in favor of the perpetrators. Case 15 to 4472, you dismissed trafficking charges against Linda Maxwell despite overwhelming evidence. Case 16 to 8821, you granted custody to an adoptive family even though evidence showed the child had been purchased illegally. Case 18 to 2267, you blocked a deportation proceeding that would have exposed your network's operations in Guatemala. Barrett was no longer just sobbing, she was having what appeared to be a complete psychological breakdown. You turned the federal judiciary into a tool for protecting child traffickers, Jasmine said. You perverted justice itself to cover up your crimes. Let's talk about the money, Jasmine said, pulling out financial documents. Your participation in this trafficking network wasn't just about acquiring children for your family. It was about profit. She spread banking records across her table. These records show that between 2005 and 2020, you personally profited over $8.7 million from the sale and trafficking of children. You weren't just a customer of this network, you were one of its primary operators. Bank account ending in 4472, $2.3 million in deposits from adoption services. Offshore account in the Cayman Islands, $4.8 million traced to child trafficking proceeds. Real estate investments funded by trafficking profits, $1.6 million. Barrett had stopped responding entirely. She sat motionless in her chair, staring at nothing, as her entire world crumbled around her. You used the money to fund your lifestyle, your children's private school educations, and your husband's failing law practice, Jasmine continued. Every aspect of your family's comfortable life was built on the suffering of exploited mothers and trafficked children. But this isn't just about documents and financial records, Jasmine said, her voice taking on a different tone, softer, more personal. This is about real people whose lives you destroyed. She gestured toward the gallery, where several women had been sitting quietly throughout the proceedings. Maria Santos is here today. She's 29 years old now, and she's never been able to hold the daughter you stole from her. A young Latina woman stood up slowly. Her face was streaked with tears, but her voice was strong when she spoke. Judge Barrett, you took my baby and told me she was dead. For 10 years, I grieved for a daughter who was alive but living with strangers. You destroyed my life for money. Another woman stood up. I'm Carmen Rodriguez. You bought my son Miguel in 2013. When I tried to change my mind, you had me arrested and threatened with deportation. I haven't seen my child in 7 years. 1 year after Barrett's arrest, Jasmine returned to the same courthouse where she had exposed the trafficking network. This time, she was there for the sentencing of the last defendants in the conspiracy. As she walked through the marble halls where Barrett had once wielded corrupt power, Jasmine reflected on how much had changed. The system wasn't perfect, but it was cleaner. Justice was more than just a word carved in stone. In the gallery sat Maria Santos, holding her daughter Emma's hand. Carmen Rodriguez was there with her son Miguel, finally reunited after 7 years. Dozens of other families, torn apart by Barrett's greed, were now healing together. The judge, Barrett's replacement, an honest woman with no connections to trafficking networks, delivered the final sentences. The last conspirators would spend decades in prison. After the hearing, Jasmine held a brief press conference on the courthouse steps where Barrett had been arrested in handcuffs exactly 1 year earlier. Justice doesn't happen overnight, Jasmine said to the assembled reporters. But it does happen. Today, the last criminals in Amy Coney Barrett's trafficking network have been held accountable. A reporter asked, "What's next for you, Justice Crockett?" Jasmine smiled. "There's always more corruption to expose, more truth to uncover. My work is never done." As she walked away from the courthouse, past the marble columns that had once seemed so intimidating, Jasmine carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had proven that even the most powerful criminals could be brought to justice. Behind her, carved in stone above the courthouse entrance, the words, "Equal justice under law," seemed to mean something again. Amy Coney Barrett had learned the hard way that in America, no one is above the law. Not even Supreme Court justices who traffic in human lives. The question that had started it all, "You're going to jail," had been answered definitively. Amy Coney Barrett was indeed going to jail. For life. But it wasn't Jasmine Crockett who ended up behind bars. It was the corrupt judge who thought she was untouchable. The woman who had screamed threats about jail time was now wearing orange jumpsuits and counting days in a concrete cell. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett wore the black robes of a Supreme Court justice, upholding the law Barrett had perverted for so many years. Justice, it turned out, had a sense of irony. And Jasmine Crockett was its instrument. "These women," Jasmine said, "are the real victims of your crimes. Not legal abstractions or case numbers, but human beings whose children were stolen through your greed and corruption." Faced with the testimony of her victims and the overwhelming evidence of her crimes, Barrett made one final, desperate attempt to salvage something from the wreckage of her career. She stood up shakily, gripping her bench for support, and tried to reassert her judicial authority. This is all lies. Fabricated evidence. A political hit job designed to destroy conservative voices on the federal bench. Her voice was hoarse, desperate, completely lacking the authority she had projected just hours earlier. "I am a federal judge. I will not be destroyed by communist lies and fake documents." But her words rang hollow in the face of the evidence Jasmine had presented. DNA tests, financial records, audio recordings, witness testimony, the case against Barrett was ironclad. "Bailiff!" Barrett screamed, pointing at Jasmine with a shaking finger. "I order you to arrest this woman for contempt. For perjury. For conspiracy." But the bailiffs didn't move. They stood frozen, uncertain how to proceed in a situation that had moved far beyond normal judicial proceedings. "I am still the judge here," Barrett shrieked. "I still have authority. You will follow my orders." Jasmine stood up slowly, her calm contrasting sharply with Barrett's hysteria. "Judge Barrett," she said quietly, "you lost your authority the moment you chose to participate in child trafficking. You lost your legitimacy when you perverted justice to protect criminals. You lost your right to sit on any bench when you used your position to exploit vulnerable families." She stepped forward, no longer addressing Barrett as a judge but as what she truly was, a criminal defendant. "Amy Coney Barrett, you are not a judge. You are a human trafficker. You are a fraud. You are a criminal who has spent 15 years hiding behind black robes while destroying innocent lives." Barrett backed away from her bench, her legs trembling. "The federal marshals are outside," Jasmine continued. "They're waiting for you to come quietly, but they'll take you either way. Your career is over. Your freedom is over. Your lies have finally caught up with you." She gestured toward the courtroom doors. "You can walk out of here with whatever dignity you have left, or you can be dragged out in handcuffs. Your choice." Barrett's psychological collapse was now complete. The carefully constructed facade of judicial authority had crumbled, revealing the desperate, cornered criminal underneath. "This can't be happening," she whispered, more to herself than to anyone in the courtroom. "This isn't real. This is a nightmare." She looked around the courtroom as if seeing it for the first time, her eyes wild and unfocused. "I'm a federal judge. I was confirmed by the Senate. I sit on the Supreme Court." But even as she spoke the words, Barrett seemed to realize they no longer meant anything. The title, the position, the authority, all of it was already gone. "My children," she whispered suddenly, the full implications of her situation finally hitting her. "What about my children? Your trafficked children are being placed in protective custody pending DNA testing and attempts to reunite them with their biological families," Jasmine said matter-of-factly. The ones who want to maintain a relationship with you will be allowed to do so under supervised visitation. Barrett let out a sound that was part sob, part scream, the sound of a woman realizing she had lost everything that ever mattered to her. As if summoned by Barrett's breakdown, the courtroom doors opened and 6 federal marshals entered in formation. They moved with the practiced efficiency of law enforcement officers executing a high-profile arrest. The lead marshal, a tall woman with graying hair and steel in her eyes, approached Barrett's bench. "Amy Coney Barrett," she announced in a clear, official voice that carried to every corner of the courtroom, "you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit human trafficking, wire fraud, money laundering, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to violate the civil rights of multiple victims." Barrett had stopped responding to external stimuli. She sat motionless as the marshal continued reading her rights. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you." The other marshals had formed a perimeter around the bench, ensuring there was no possibility of escape or interference. "Do you understand these rights as I have read them to you?" Barrett said nothing. She stared straight ahead as if she were looking through the walls of the courtroom into some other reality where none of this was happening. The federal marshals were prepared for Barrett's non-responsive state. 2 of them moved to either side of her chair while a third produced a set of handcuffs. "Judge Barrett," the lead marshal said, though the title now seemed like a cruel joke, "we need you to stand up and put your hands behind your back." When Barrett didn't respond, the marshals gently but firmly lifted her from her chair. She offered no resistance as they secured the handcuffs around her wrists. The sight of Amy Coney Barrett, former Supreme Court Justice, being led away in handcuffs was captured by dozens of cameras. The image would become iconic, a symbol of how even the most powerful people in America could be held accountable for their crimes. As the marshals escorted Barrett toward the courtroom doors, she finally seemed to snap back to reality. She turned her head back toward Jasmine, her face contorted with rage and desperation. "You destroyed my family," she screamed, her voice echoing off the marble walls. "You destroyed innocent children. How can you live with yourself?" Jasmine met her gaze calmly. "I didn't destroy your family, Amy. I exposed the crimes you committed to create it. Those children deserve to know the truth about where they came from." Barrett's legs buckled as the full weight of her situation hit her. The marshals had to support her weight as they continued toward the exit. "This isn't over," Barrett yelled, though her voice was breaking. "I'll appeal everything. I'll fight this. You'll spend the rest of your life in federal prison," Jasmine said quietly. "Where you belong." The moment Barrett was led out of the courtroom, chaos erupted outside. The courthouse steps were packed with reporters, camera crews, and hundreds of protesters who had gathered after news of the hearing broke on social media. As the courthouse doors opened and Barrett appeared in handcuffs, camera flashes exploded like artillery fire. Questions bombarded her from every direction. "Judge Barrett, how do you respond to the trafficking charges? What do you say to the families you separated? Did other Supreme Court justices know about your crimes? Will you resign from the court?" Barrett said nothing. She kept her head down as the marshals guided her through the crowd toward a waiting federal transport vehicle. Her once perfect hair was disheveled, her judicial robes wrinkled and stained with tears. The contrast with her composed, authoritative entrance that morning was stark. In less than 8 hours, Amy Coney Barrett had gone from one of the most powerful judges in America to a criminal defendant facing life in prison. An hour later, Jasmine held an impromptu press conference on the courthouse steps. Unlike Barrett's chaotic perp walk, this was organized, controlled, and devastatingly effective. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jasmine began, her voice carrying clearly over the crowd, "today we witnessed the exposure of one of the most horrific criminal conspiracies in American history." She paused to let the gravity of her words sink in. Amy Coney Barrett was not just a corrupt judge. She was the leader of a human trafficking network that stole children from vulnerable mothers and sold them to wealthy families for profit. The crowd of reporters hung on every word. For 15 years, Barrett used her position as a federal judge to protect this network, obstruct investigations, and pervert justice. She profited millions of dollars from the sale of human beings while presenting herself as a champion of family values. Questions erupted from the crowd. How long have you been investigating Barrett? How many children were trafficked? Are other judges involved? Jasmine raised her hand for quiet. This investigation took 3 years of painstaking work. We identified 247 children who were trafficked through Barrett's network. The investigation is ongoing, and we expect additional arrests in the coming weeks. Within hours, the political implications of Barrett's arrest reverberated through Washington like an earthquake. Every major news network interrupted regular programming for continuous coverage. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer called an emergency session. The integrity of the Supreme Court has been fundamentally compromised. We must act immediately to restore public confidence in our judicial system. Even conservative senators distanced themselves from Barrett. Senator Ted Cruz, who had enthusiastically supported her confirmation, issued a statement. If these allegations are proven true, they represent a betrayal of everything conservatives stand for. President Biden addressed the nation from the Oval Office. Today's revelations about Justice Barrett are deeply disturbing. No one is above the law in America, and that includes members of our highest court. Barrett's arrest created an immediate constitutional crisis. Could the Supreme Court continue to function with one of its members under federal indictment for human trafficking? Chief Justice Roberts, himself still reeling from his own recent scandals, called an emergency meeting of the remaining justices. Within 24 hours, they issued an unprecedented joint statement. In light of the serious criminal charges filed against Justice Barrett, she is hereby suspended from all judicial duties pending resolution of her case. The court will operate with 8 justices until this matter is resolved. But legal scholars questioned whether Barrett's previous votes should be invalidated. How many Supreme Court decisions had been influenced by a criminal who was using her position to protect a trafficking network? The Barrett scandal made headlines around the world. International media portrayed it as evidence of systemic corruption in American institutions. The United Nations Human Rights Council announced an investigation into child trafficking involving U.S. officials. Interpol expanded its investigation to identify additional victims and perpetrators. Several countries suspended adoption agreements with the United States pending a review of safeguards against trafficking. But human rights organizations praised Jasmine's courage. Amnesty International issued a statement. Jasmine Crockett's investigation represents the kind of accountability that gives hope to trafficking victims worldwide. For the women whose children had been stolen by Barrett's network, the arrest represented both vindication and the beginning of a long healing process. Maria Santos, whose daughter Emma had been taken in 2010, spoke to reporters outside the courthouse. For 10 years, I thought my baby was dead. Today I learned she's alive, and there's hope I might see her again. A victims' rights organization announced it would provide legal representation for families seeking to reunite with trafficked children. These families have suffered enough, their spokesperson said. It's time for justice and healing. Within 48 hours of her arrest, Barrett had assembled a team of high-profile defense attorneys. They immediately began crafting a strategy that seemed to rely on attacking Jasmine's investigation rather than defending Barrett's actions. Her lead attorney, Jonathan Morrison, held his own press conference. Amy Coney Barrett is the victim of a politically motivated witch hunt designed to destroy conservative voices on the federal bench. But the evidence was overwhelming. DNA tests confirmed that none of Barrett's 7 children were biologically related to her. Financial records showed millions in trafficking proceeds. Audio recordings captured her threatening victims. Legal experts predicted Barrett would eventually accept a plea bargain to avoid the death penalty, which could apply to her trafficking charges. The House Judiciary Committee announced immediate hearings into the Barrett trafficking scandal. Jasmine was asked to testify about her investigation and provide evidence to support criminal prosecutions. When she appeared before the committee, the hearing room was packed beyond capacity. Her testimony was broadcast live to over 40 million viewers worldwide. Members of Congress, Jasmine began, Amy Coney Barrett's crimes represent more than individual corruption. They reveal systematic failures in how we vet and monitor federal judges. She presented evidence that Barrett's trafficking activities had been covered up by judicial colleagues, FBI officials, and political allies. We need comprehensive reform of the judicial system to ensure this never happens again, Jasmine concluded. No judge should be above the law. Barrett's arrest triggered investigations into dozens of other judges, politicians, and officials who had been connected to the trafficking network. Within a month, federal agents had arrested Senator Mike Matthews of Texas, Congressman Robert Walsh of Florida, Judge Patricia Harrison of the Fifth Circuit, 15 adoption facilitators, 7 government officials, 3 FBI agents who had obstructed investigations. The scandal reached into the highest levels of government, implicating officials from 3 different presidential administrations. Faced with overwhelming evidence and the prospect of the death penalty, Barrett eventually agreed to cooperate with federal investigators. In exchange for a life sentence without parole, she provided detailed information about the trafficking network's operations. Her confession, delivered in a federal courthouse in Chicago, was devastating. I began purchasing children in 2005 because I wanted a large family but couldn't have biological children. What started as personal desire became a business opportunity when I realized how much money could be made. She admitted to personally facilitating the trafficking of over 300 children and profiting more than $12 million from their sale. I used my position as a federal judge to protect the network and silence victims. I perverted justice for personal gain. Barrett's confession sparked a nationwide movement for judicial reform. Jasmine emerged as the leading voice for comprehensive changes to prevent future corruption. Congress passed the Judicial Accountability Act, establishing annual financial audits for all federal judges, independent oversight of judicial conduct, criminal penalties for judicial corruption, term limits for Supreme Court justices. The legislation was nicknamed the Crockett Act, in honor of Jasmine's investigation. As DNA testing and investigation continued, heart-wrenching stories emerged of families separated by Barrett's trafficking network. Emma Santos Barrett, now 12, was reunited with her biological mother Maria after a decade of separation. The reunion, captured by news cameras, became a symbol of justice finally served. Other children faced more complex situations. Some had no memory of their biological families and considered their adoptive families to be their real homes. Therapists and social workers worked carefully to navigate these delicate relationships. Not all reunions were successful, but each represented a step toward healing for families destroyed by Barrett's greed. Amy Coney Barrett was sentenced to life without parole and sent to the Federal Correctional Complex in Florence, Colorado, the same supermax prison that housed terrorists and other high-profile criminals. Prison officials confirmed that Barrett was kept in protective custody due to threats from other inmates. Her fall from Supreme Court justice to federal prisoner was complete. She spent her days in a small concrete cell, a stark contrast to the mahogany chambers where she had once wielded immense power. For Jasmine Crockett, the Barrett investigation established her as one of the most effective corruption fighters in American history. But she refused to rest on her achievements. Barrett was just one criminal in a system full of corruption, she said in interviews. My work is far from over. She announced plans to investigate corruption in the federal judiciary, corporate influence in politics, and human trafficking networks worldwide. Universities began offering courses on the Crockett method of corruption investigation. Law schools required students to study her techniques for exposing official misconduct. With Barrett gone and Roberts discredited, the Supreme Court faced a crisis of legitimacy. President Biden appointed Jasmine to fill Barrett's seat, making her the youngest justice in court history. Her confirmation hearing was a formality. After exposing Barrett's crimes, no senator dared question Jasmine's qualifications. When she was sworn in as Associate Justice, Jasmine placed her hand on the same constitution that Barrett had violated. But this time, the oath meant something again. "I swear to uphold justice without fear or favor," Jasmine said, "and to ensure that this court serves all Americans, not just the wealthy and powerful." Barrett's prosecution marked a turning point in American democracy. For the first time in decades, citizens felt empowered to demand accountability from their government. Corruption investigations expanded throughout the federal system. Dozens of officials resigned rather than face scrutiny. Others were prosecuted and imprisoned. The message was clear: no one was above the law, regardless of their position or power. Schools began teaching about the Barrett scandal as an example of how corruption could infiltrate the highest levels of government, and how one person's courage could expose the truth. 1 year after Barrett's arrest, Jasmine returned to the same courthouse where she had exposed the trafficking network. This time, she was there for the sentencing of the last defendants in the conspiracy. As she walked through the marble halls where Barrett had once wielded corrupt power, Jasmine reflected on how much had changed. The system wasn't perfect, but it was cleaner. Justice was more than just a word carved in stone. In the gallery sat Maria Santos, holding her daughter Emma's hand. Carmen Rodriguez was there with her son Miguel, finally reunited after 7 years. Dozens of other families, torn apart by Barrett's greed, were now healing together. The judge, Barrett's replacement, an honest woman with no connections to trafficking networks, delivered the final sentences. The last conspirators would spend decades in prison. After the hearing, Jasmine held a brief press conference on the courthouse steps where Barrett had been arrested in handcuffs exactly 1 year earlier. "Justice doesn't happen overnight," Jasmine said to the assembled reporters. "But it does happen. Today, the last criminals in Amy Coney Barrett's trafficking network have been held accountable." A reporter asked, "What's next for you, Justice Crockett?" Jasmine smiled. "There's always more corruption to expose, more truth to uncover. My work is never done." As she walked away from the courthouse, past the marble columns that had once seemed so intimidating, Jasmine carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had proven that even the most powerful criminals could be brought to justice. Behind her, carved in stone above the courthouse entrance, the words, "Equal justice under law," seemed to mean something again. Amy Coney Barrett had learned the hard way that in America, no one is above the law. Not even Supreme Court justices who traffic in human lives. Epilogue, the question answered. The question that had started it all, "You're going to jail," had been answered definitively. Amy Coney Barrett was indeed going to jail. For life. But it wasn't Jasmine Crockett who ended up behind bars. It was the corrupt judge who thought she was untouchable. The woman who had screamed threats about jail time was now wearing orange jumpsuits and counting days in a concrete cell. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett wore the black robes of a Supreme Court justice, upholding the law Barrett had perverted for so many years. Justice, it turned out, had a sense of irony. And Jasmine Crockett was its instrument.